What's happening at the sale barns and in the market right now? How does that line up with what was predicted last year? This is a monthly market update with Karoline Rose-Bohannan, where she will fill us in on what market trends she is seeing and how things are going compared to last year. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Cattleman U podcast. I'm your host, Karoline Rose-Bohannan, and today we are going to be talking cattle markets, which is an episode I have wanted to incorporate into the Cattleman U podcast for a long time. And so we digested the numbers, and to be honest, we have a lot of thoughts on what's happening in the cattle market. And so I'm going to allow Jordyn to explain a little bit how we're going to do these episodes so we can bring you the real data that is helpful for when you're trying to make market decisions.
I'm so excited to be doing these episodes because I myself am learning every time we're pulling the numbers and when we're just having conversations off camera. So I'm very excited. Each week we're going to break down the reports. So we're pulling reports from the United States Department of Agriculture market reports. In the state of Montana, the weekly reports. We're getting all the numbers for the 4 weights, 5 weights, 6 weights, 7 weights of steers and heifers, all of the slaughter cows, and all of the slaughter bulls. So each week we're going to be digesting those numbers and bringing you the data for this year as well as 2023. So we're really excited to be comparing the historical data and bringing you information that you can't find anywhere else. First, I want to dive into your background, Karoline. So tell me a little bit about your background with the cattle market.
So for those of you who don't know, part of what I do in K-Rose Company and in Cattleman U is I buy feeder cattle with my dad. And so together we buy somewhere in the 20 to 40,000 head of cattle depending on the year. So we're buying not only for ourselves, but we have orders from customers as well. So we act as a representative in the barn. We buy both in the barn and in the country, and we're representatives on Northern Livestock. So one, I'm in the sale barn pretty consistently this time of year, 3 to 5 sales a week. My dad, the exact same, just different barns. And we're helping customers market cattle, and then we're always trying to see opportunity for our own operation. So lots of different ways that we analyze the market, because how you analyze the market if you are buying to retain ownership looks a little different than if you are trying to get the most dollars for your customers. So we dive into the market every single day. Part of what we do as an operation is we have a ticket for value cattle that work at home. So these cattle, we know we can handle the risk and we can buy them to make a profit. Always the goal would be a minimum of $100, but we are analyzing the cattle markets in all different senses and giving a lot of consulting advice to people. And should they sell their cull cows? I had a customer calling last night. Should I buy replacement heifers and breed them, or should I buy bred cows? So we just see the cattle market in a ton of different avenues. We see it as an opportunity to help us mitigate and manage risk. And so it's really cool to sit in the barn and to see what's actually happening in real life. And then when we dove into the numbers, it's things that I saw, but it's so nice to have the real data.
Is there any disclaimer about the data before we dive in?
There's always going to be disclaimers when you talk about cattle market data. One, it's very regional, right? So this is Montana. In Montana, we have kind of an outside factor, which is the Canadian market, that can really change the price of Montana cattle because it is much closer to get to Canada than it is to the Midwest. And also it's not in particular all the barns we sit in. So if you guys are following along on our TikTok or any other platform that we talk a lot about the barns I'm in Idaho, Washington, and Oregon right now, but this is the Montana data. The other thing is we're going to talk a little bit about what happens in 2025. I don't have a crystal ball. I can tell you based on historical data what I think is going to happen, what I expect to happen. But to be honest, none of us know. And if I did have a crystal ball, I probably wouldn't be buying cattle for a living. I would be doing something else. But it's just my best judgment of what to expect. And we might be a year or two off on a shift in the market, but we know something's coming and we know there are factors playing into that. So we can make a great educated guess.
Mm-hmm. Why should a rancher follow the market, and where do they find the best data for them?
This is one of my biggest pet peeves, I would say, is when I call and, ask a rancher what they want for their calves and they say something to why I haven't really been following along. And part of your responsibility in my mind as a good steward of these cattle and of the operation and running it as a business is to know what the market's doing. The other thing is you can't compare apples to oranges. It's really easy for us to say, well, my neighbor got this. Well, do you buy the exact same, do you share bulls with your neighbor? Do you vaccinate on the same day? Do you start calving the same day and in calving the same day? No, like, is your grass the exact same? Do they run in the same pasture? Like, there's all these factors that change the value of cattle. And so don't compare apples to oranges, but you need to at least have an idea. One, if you don't know what the market is, you better know what your costs are and what you have to have for your cattle. But nowadays there's podcasts there. We're going to have a weekly podcast. There's daily cattle market podcasts. There's social media. There's, print ad. There's all these places that you can find an update on the cattle market. But I do think it probably serves ranchers well to sit in a barn once or twice a fall and just see what the trends are and what are some things that are causing some discounts. Where is there a lot of activity and interest in the buyers? Just paying attention to those can really help you decide how to sell your cattle and when to sell them.
Yeah, I definitely think the more knowledge, the better. You can't have too much cattle market knowledge.
Absolutely.
On Instagram, you're going to be doing some polls. Why don't you tell us about those?
Yeah, so it's really interesting to me how I view the market because I'm pretty in it, right? I mean, I sat in 5 sale barns last week. And so I'm seeing thousands of cattle sell group by group, and I'm looking at my ticket on every single set to see if I have an order for it. And so I'm very into it. So I asked 2 questions on Instagram. I'm going to tell you about it on next week's episode, but I want you to let us know your thoughts. So the first was, did you make more money as a rancher in 2023 or 2024? So that's the first question. Second question, did cattle bring more money in 2023 than they did in 2024? So if you're watching this on YouTube, comment. If you're listening on the podcast, send us a message. I want to know because the results are a little bit surprising. So we're going to talk about those. But after we get done with this podcast, you might be able to guess the results.
Yeah, this will be a little bit of a cheat code for you on answering those questions. We're going to dive into the data. So first week of October of 2024. Please explain to us why we saw a dramatic decrease in the number of calves sold in 2024 compared to the same time in 2023. In 2024, there was 1,170-ish brought to the sale barn, and in 2023, we saw 2,310.
Yeah, this one stat, this was the first stat we pulled. This is crazy. So we saw less than half of the cattle come to the barn the first week in October in 24 than the first week in October in 23. A few things that I think are playing this, and these are trends we're going to see when we talk about all of the October data. We know we have less cattle. That is just a fact. Some of it's due to drought. Some of it's due to, people retiring, getting out of the business. There's a lot of factors. Poor rebreeds, there's a lot of factors. We have less cattle. That's an easy fact. Second of all, I think potentially we saw more cattle being sold in forward contracts because the prices were high. So people in that July and August got a little nervous, and maybe they've always taken them to the sale, but they said this year I'm going to sell them on the video, or I'm going to forward contract them because I don't want us to have a fall like 2015, I think was the year where it just every week or every day in the fall just got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. I think there was a little bit of fear of that. So I think those 2 things. The other thing that's an interesting factor that is solely Montana based is it's been beautiful. And so there are calves that normally last October would have had to come to town because of weather. We have not gotten that weather yet. And so people can leave those pairs out a little bit longer because we haven't had the weather and they can still graze, which is abnormal for Montana. So I think we saw some different factors leading into that, but I will tell you from a buyer perspective, my customers who start buying in October are having a hard time filling their order because there are just significantly less cattle when we look at the grand scheme of things that are coming through those sale barns.
We have exciting news, guys. Registration for CattleCon 2025 is officially open. CattleCon is happening from February 4th through the 6th in San Antonio, Texas. If you haven't experienced CattleCon, it's quite literally where the beef industry meets. It's not only filled with educational opportunities, but it's a place to share your opinion and be part of the beef industry's voice. Every voice matters. Whether you're just starting out or have been in the business for years, your input shapes the future. That's why organizations like the National Cattlemen's Beef Association are so important. They advocate for us in Washington, D.C., promote beef, and take on tough regulatory challenges we face. Secure your spot today to take advantage of the best early bird pricing. Whether you're planning to attend, exhibit, or join NCBA, now is the time to get involved. Register now at convention.ncba.org and use code Karoline, Karoline, for $50 off a full CattleCon registration and $20 off a trade show only registration. Let's come together, make our voices heard, and shape the future of the beef industry. See you in San Antonio.
In particular, we saw significantly less 7-weight steers. Why is that?
So this is really interesting because we're seeing a little bit of that drought come into play. So in 2023, we saw more 7-weight steers. This year, I think those were 6-weight steers. I think maybe because they were so early in October and we did have such a drought issue in a lot of places that maybe those steers just didn't quite get as big. Now, one of the things is I think maybe the quality of the 7-weights probably increased, which it'd be nice if we had a video, right, and we could look at the quality, but the number decreased, and I think that's probably the reason, is I think they just probably went into a lighter weight class. I'm guessing we're gonna see those 7-weight numbers increase as we get through October, because overall, we're just getting better and better at genetics. So the quality of cattle is going to continuously improve. The other thing too is I do see a shift in calving periods. People now are really kind of wanting March and April calves. And I would say 10 years ago, we sold more February calving cows. So people are calving a little bit later. That means, you know, those calves are going to be younger. And it's hard to hit 7 that first week in October if your calves are younger.
On the other hand, why do you think we saw more 7-weight heifers in 2024 than we did in 2023?
I think these 7-weight heifers are yearlings. So I don't think they're actually calves. I think it's pretty rare to have a good 7-weight calf come to town the first week in October. Now, there's some exceptions to the rule, and you might be an exception. But for the most part, I think those are light yearlings that probably got sorted off and didn't make a load, and then they were brought to town.
Looking ahead, what do you expect the cattle numbers to be in 2025?
I think there's a huge concern about the numbers of cattle coming to town. If I were a rancher, I would sell the first 2 weeks in October. So I hope for your guys' sake and profitability that those numbers increase, because when we look at hitting the April board, which April is the highest fat board historically, it's not actually weight when you sell your cattle, it's days on feed. So in order to get them to hit that April board, they have to be a certain number of days on feed. And if you sell before October 15th, you can hit that. So I always encourage my customers, get them down the roads end of September, beginning of October. And so I hope that trend increases. But at some point, we're going to have to retain some heifers. I'm not seeing a ton of that happen right now. And so we won't really see the cattle numbers dramatically increase until we start to retain some heifers.
We saw more cull cows come to town in early October in 2024 than 23. Why was that?
This is harder to determine why we saw more. One, we're going to talk about it, but the price is substantially different. 2, I think we did have probably a poor breed up. I think we're seeing that a little bit with the droughts. I certainly have talked about that about heiferettes. We've seen more heiferettes come to town in poorer quality than ever before. So I think we have some mismatched genetics and environments happening, and so there's going to be some more open cows come to town. Also, I think people are waiting because the weather is nice. I'm guessing some people preg checked a little bit differently than they normally do, which affected those numbers.
Mm-hmm. Bulls got lighter in 2024. And we saw almost double the amount come into town in early October. Why is that?
Makes sense. You want to sell your bulls because the bull price game has been crazy. It was crazy in September. It's crazy in October. I mean, I'm guessing when we do November reports, we're going to see a little bit of dip because of simply supply and demand. We're going to see that dip come in late October too. But you can sell a bull for more than probably what some of you bought a bull for bought that bull for. And so I can see that. Pull them off and get them sold. I think it really helps when thinking about, am I going to purchase a new bull or am I going to keep a bull when they're worth as much as they are? But we saw them get lighter too, and that might be a drought issue, right? Where we just didn't have as good quality. The other thing too is I'm a big believer that maybe we have some mismatched genetics. And so are we buying bulls that don't fit our environment because of the name, because of what we expect to happen, or because of the promise that the bull breeder gave us? So are we buying bulls that don't fit what our goals are? And so we're having lighter bulls come to town. They can't maintain their weight. Maybe they didn't breed as many females. All of these factors, I think, are causing the coal bulls to get a little bit lighter. And I think we're selling them probably younger. I think people tried to hold on to those bulls 4, 5, 6 years. Now, if you had it for 2 or 3 years and you're starting to keep heifers back with the price, I'd sell them.
Do you think that since they were pulled earlier, that is part of that correlation to being lighter?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people were worried about the price dropping, and so they just pulled them and brought them. And I think sometimes people put them in a pen and fatten their bulls up a little before they take them to town. With a risk of the price significantly dropping, I think you just sell them.
Mm-hmm. We're going to now dive into prices from numbers. So the first prices we're going to talk about is the 4 weights. We saw an increase by 20 plus on the steers, and in heifers we saw 35 plus increase.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
The 4 weights have been, there is some interesting data when we get later in October, but for the most part, the 4 weights, have been really hard to buy on a value ticket because they are just high. And we're seeing better quality 4 weights than we historically have saw, probably because of later calving periods, drought, all these same topics we're going to talk about week after week. But the price that 4 weights are bringing, when I talk to people about penciling it out, it makes a lot of sense to sell those like calves versus hold on to them until the spring. If you can get them moved with what they're bringing per head, I think you got to sell them.
Yeah. The price went from a $296 to a $315 on those 4 weights for the steers.
It's crazy. Anytime we can have an average increase over $3, I think it's really good money. We are seeing some of those light cattle bring $4 in some of the barns now. And so that's going to be really interesting data as we get along. But again, these are kind of, the data we're pulling has all quality. And so you are going to see probably a lower average than that really high-end, double-vacked, weaned, 4 weight. But still, anytime the price gets over $3, I think that's an incredible sale.
Yeah, so 5 weights. Steers went up by a little, about 4, and heifers stayed the same. Why is that?
5 weights in early October are challenging because what do you do with them? So 4 weights are still light enough that they can be turned into grass calves. 5 weights, it's a little bit early, too young for those heifers to be breeding heifers. And it's just kind of this intermingle. Some people don't think you can put 5 weights straight in a feedlot. I think you probably can, but it's this awkward price. And so as we get later in October and into November, we're going to see that price of 5 weights increase. But right now, it's just kind of a timing and where you go on the market. That is an opportunity if we're going to compare apples to apples when it looks like just increases. If you're in the market for 5 weights, it might be smart to enter the market a little bit earlier than you have historically, or even in the market for 6 weights and buy them as 5 weights in early October.
On the 6 weights, steers went down and heifers increased.
Yeah, that's really interesting because 6 weight cattle have been in October. One of the concerns that you're going to get with 6 weight steers are they poor yearlings? And I'm seeing a little bit of this, or a little bit of are they fall calves? And so to see that price decrease, again, it's still similar to that awkward weight. And for the most part, a lot of the 6 weights are the contracted cattle. So the really top end 6 weights, I would expect those to be sold as load lots on the video or in the country. And so what we see come to the sale barn is probably not the first draft offering of a lot of ranches. These might be the sort offs and things like that. But heifers, I think that one is telling us we're not seeing heifer retention yet, because if we were seeing the good heifers stay home, I think that price would mimic the steers.
On 7 weights, we again saw the steers drop by about 10 cents, and heifers stayed the same price.
I think a lot of that is because those 7 weights are tapping into those light yearlings. And we're not going to see a lot of great 7 weights the first week in October, unless you calve in January. And if you calve in January, I hope you've sold your cattle in the country. Not that the sale barn's not a good option. There's just going to be quite a demand. And so I think to get the best bet, you should probably look at contracting those cattle if you really want to ship them the first week in October. They would hit the April board. There's not very many. So you would have this kind of advantage in the marketplace when you look at those. But I'm guessing the data that we're seeing are some of those small yearlings, which, to be honest, even up until, early November, we still see some of those long-tailed. You call them yearlings. They're a little bit older, but they're calf weights.
We are so excited to bring you our fall Cattleman U store. We have worked with different artists, custom makers, and more to bring you a variety of fall ranch items. Whether you are currently living and working on a cattle operation or still dreaming about the long days riding in the pasture, our fall store items are for you. Enjoy the fall weather cozied up in your Cattleman U crew neck, custom brand wild rag, and burning your new favorite candle. In store, you will find all of this and more. We're now offering crew necks, t-shirts, hats, wild rags, mugs, custom coffee, custom scented candles, and matchboxes. Shop all of this at cattlemanurive.com/store.
On the cull cows in 2024, we saw about 100 head more coming to the barn, and the price is significantly up by more than 20.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. On the cull cows, I think we saw cows come to town in 24 that maybe were bred, but people have decided to sell them because they don't fit some of their specs. And when they're bringing so much money, you get to cull a little harder because you want to keep the really good ones around. And a lot of these cull cows, we're talking hundreds of dollars more per head, which can just change an operation substantially. If you have a load of cull cows, once we get into the price data, it's going to be crazy.
Yeah, so for light cull cows, they brought $200 more a head. For the middle weights, they brought $180 more a head, and then for the 1,400 pounds and up, they brought $265 more a head.
So, we're talking $200 a head more. So if you have 10 of them, that's $2,000. So if you have a load worth, that's $10,000 more this year on the light end than it was last year. So what would $10,000 do in your pocket on top of what you expect? That's money that can change an operation if used correctly. Now, there's a big talk about inflation and how much things cost, but when we just compare apples to apples, that's significantly more money on your cull cows.
Yeah, double the amount of cull bulls also came into town. Why do you think that is?
I think they wanted to sell them. Mm-hmm. There's no point in keeping a bull over the winter that is in poor condition, that maybe you don't like, that maybe got himself hurt, where you might rehab one if the bull was in half of what you bought it for, and now it's going to cost double to buy a new one. You might rehab one, you might feed one a little bit longer, and you might maintain it a little bit more. But when they bring, a lot of bulls in town, I think, are bringing $2,500. And so there's a lot of bulls in Montana sold, like $1,800 to $2,500. Mm-hmm. And so if you can sell the bull for close to what you bought the bull and he bred your cows, it's a win-win. I would sell them too.
Yeah, the up to 1,700 pound bulls, on average, we're bringing $520 more a head, bringing almost $2,000 a bull.
Yeah. $500 more a head is a lot of money. That is going to be reflected in the grocery store. Hear me say that. The price of ground beef has got to go up because, when you think about the bulk amount that we're selling and all of these numbers, one, we're down on cow numbers, so we have to get more meat out of each cow. There's obviously talk about importing, some lean ground beef in because we just simply don't have enough. But when we see that extra $500 get added, that's going to eventually have to go to the consumer. And I don't know about you guys, but we feel grocery prices are just getting really close to where they're not feeling sustainable. And I know when we think about the election, that was a huge point of concern. I mean, we just kept hearing about grocery store prices. Well, when we're paying $500 more per cold bowl, I don't know how we can't see that reflected in the grocery store. And at some point, that's going to have to soften.
Yeah, and even the bigger bowls are bringing $455 more ahead. On average, they're bringing $2,800.
$2,800. Can you believe that? I mean, it'd be really interesting data, and we can try to find it for you guys, but how many bowls in Montana sold under $2,800? Mm-hmm. Like, virgin, really high quality bowls, EPDs, genetics you've studied for years. Mm-hmm. I mean, for a lot of my seed stock customers, $2,800, I mean, that's the bottom fourth of their sale, which are really high quality bowls. Mm-hmm. So that's a great price to get for a cold bowl. And so if you haven't, it would be good to think about exchanging your bowls this year, because to make that kind of money, there's no guarantee that 2025 is going to look like this. And if you can exchange it and buy one back for the same price or potentially even less, mm-hmm. it's probably something to consider.
Yeah, so we talked about the prices, we talked about the numbers. On numbers, you predicted a little bit for 2025. What do you think prices are going to do in 2025?
I keep saying this, that I think we have to be close to the top of the bell curve. So Harry Kenobi, which is a cattle feeder in West Point, Nebraska, when I first got started in 2015, he took me down to the basement, and along the walls, he had mapped out the cattle market. Every single day, he had put a pin. And so when you step back, it looks the exact same. Now there's some blips, the Capital Christmas, some other things. We'll link to some resources for you guys. But for the most part, it looked the exact same every 10 years. Some years it would shift a little bit, but the same pattern. And, there's a lot of people who say that I'm wrong, that we're going to see prices fall because we're not having that retention of cattle. And so that is going to be the unknown factor. But even with COVID, and the cow that stole Christmas, and all these other blips on the radar, we still saw it look the same. It might have a little peak that in the moment looks huge, but from the 50,000 foot view, you didn't notice anything. Prices have to go down. At some point, this is not sustainable. It is hard to replace with interest rates so high. Feeders are having a really hard time early contracting cattle because that deposit, that $100 a head, if you have a 10,000 head lot, that's a lot of money, a lot of interest that you have to pay. The other thing, and I don't think we have time to really get into it now, but it definitely needs to be a podcast that we talk about, is as the corporations move to more corporate feedlots, they can take less risk on the calves. So they have to have healthier calves come in. And so because that, they're having less labor per calves to take care of it. So we're seeing kind of a shift in the demand there. But in 2025, what historical data would say is that's the peak. 2025 is the peak. We will fall after that. I feel as if we have gotten pretty crazy. It feels crazy to me to sell calves in the 450 range. So I think we have to be close to that top or at that top. If not, I'm guessing we're going to see that in the next 18 months. And then prices will significantly go down. The data would say by 50% by the time it gets all the way to the bottom at the fall, which will be 2029, 2030, 2031, something like that, if history repeats itself.
Yeah, so that is our first week of October. Do you have any final summarizing thoughts?
I think the thing to remember is you can't compare your cattle to anyone else. So the cattle have to work for you. They have to make your family enough money to do it again next year. And it's your responsibility to know what that value is and sell the cattle when it works for you. We're going to find some really cool data. I think this was fascinating data from the first week in October. As we break these down, the other thing to remember is if you didn't sell your calves and you missed what you think is a high, you just got to make the next right best decision for your operation. So it's easy to look back. Say, I should have contracted them at this sale or to this guy, but you didn't. So take your grain of salt and really make sure that you figure out what works for your family and how to be the most profitable in this business. Hopefully this data will give you a little bit of idea, especially on the cold cows and cold bulls. That can change an operation. And so, I think it's 20% of a ranch's revenue comes from cold cattle. When they have increased this significantly, that has the opportunity to change your business and to really give you more opportunities moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. For our YouTube listeners, I have a few other questions for you. So, on our reports, we pulled the number of cattle sold in 2022 as well. So the total number in Montana was 10,326. In 2024, that number was only 4,050. Why do you think we saw that almost 6,000 cattle drop?
This is one of the very first numbers that Jordyn pulled and mentioned to me. And it seems crazy. One, because what I would expect is a fear of losing out on the high prices, and so selling cattle earlier. I don't think it's a great indicator about how many calves were down. I think one thing, we're seeing more cattle trade in the country. So I think that's always an option, right? When I recently was interviewed and they asked me if I thought the sale barns were a dying business. Well, to me, they're not. They're my whole, a huge part of our livelihood. And I really enjoy buying cattle in the sale barn, and they're so needed for ranchers at any capacity, for coal cows or their calves. We have to have sale barns. But we are seeing some of those cattle get in the country and get sold. So I think it's a little bit of that. I think we have less cattle. And I also think that there is a hope in the markets like this that we don't want to sell too early and miss the high. And so people tend to hold on a little bit longer than what would make me comfortable. And so I do a lot of consulting. A lot of guys call and say, when should I sell my calves? And the answer is when it works best for you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Cattleman U podcast on market reports. I hope this was helpful for you, and if you found any value in it, please subscribe and like this video, and be sure to follow along next week for our next market report.